So Ross Wilson is officially Newcastle United's newest sporting director, and he comes with a great CV. But hang on, you might be thinking we've heard this one before and it hasn't quite gone to plan. So let's take a closer look at the Scot, his achievements, his CV, and what might make him a little bit different to previous failures. It's all coming up, Newcastle fans, so do me a favour and make sure you stick around. Welcome back to Black White Panther, ladies and gentlemen. I hope every single Newcastle United fan, no matter how young, old, or where you might be in the world watching this, is keeping well during what is a very difficult old international break. Just when Newcastle were picking up form, we have a 2-week break and we have matches like Latvia versus England to look forward to. So glad the FA and England and FIFA are doing something about it next year. But anyway, before we get into Ross Wilson and all that good Newcastle club stuff, let's get the admin out the way. If you are new around here, you might not have seen my face for a while because I haven't done one of these long form videos for a little bit. Lots of YouTube shorts, lots of content across all socials. So please, give us a little thumbs up. That goes a very long way before we go into any more depth. Get Black White Banter on YouTube by hitting that subscribe button and get me across all social media where there's lots of different content to what you are seeing right now. Some serious, some less serious. And let's keep this channel growing. Right, that's that part over with. And I know you've done what I've just asked you. Happy days. Let's get into Ross Wilson. Look, there was a gaping gap. Mr. Hopkinson came in as the CEO. That looked a good coup. I've done a video on him if you want to watch it, if you want to flick a bit further down. His experience in America, how he's grown different brands, some of the big players in the world in Canada and America that he's worked for and what he's bringing to Newcastle United. But the sporting director, particularly for fans like you and me, feels like the one that has more significance for what we are seeing on the pitch. Transfers, academy, infrastructure, you name it, it all normally falls under one relationship, and that is manager to sporting director in the modern world. Eddie Howe has had a lot to do in this transfer window, more than he anticipated. It didn't quite go to plan, but on top of managing his squad, managing a player who was petulant and indescribable in terms of his behaviour to get that move to Liverpool, there was so much going on, but Eddie Howe navigated way through it. But that looks like being over now because Ross Wilson has been confirmed after leaving Nottingham Forest, and he is the latest man to take what looks and feels like a bit of a poisoned chalice in terms of the role of sporting director. Dan Ashworth, that was a wham-bam, thank you ma'am, stick you on garden and leave to mow the lawn before a move to Man United. Then we had Mitchell, another great CV. Everything, ticked every single box, and again, a one that I was really excited about. A year on, no one anticipated that tenure being as short as what it was, and it was another wham bam, thank you ma'am, ta-ra, and Eddie Howe got the phone call from his holidays to tell him that he'd left the role. And once again, there was a gaping gap there. So is Ross Wilson the man that can put to an end what is one of very few curses since the takeover and really stamp some authority in such an important position at such an important time in this football club? Let's take a closer look at him, and first, where his career has taken him so far. Now, Ross Wilson's story isn't like most. It wasn't a contact or a friend of a friend or even a career in football that saw him then move into it in more of a backroom team, suit and tie sort of relationship with the game. Not at all. He actually started out with Falkirk, where he grafted his bollocks off, basically volunteering early doors to then move into head of development. This 7 years at Falkirk then saw him move briefly over to Watford, where he was even actually a youth coach at one point. And then from there, he got what you would call your first big move to Huddersfield as their head of operations. Now, his time at Huddersfield was between 2012 and 2015. He led the academy, he led the scouting. He was even responsible for sports science. Now, in his time at Huddersfield, he made many changes to these different areas, and he levelled up that football club, so to speak. And a lot of people from Yorkshire might still argue to this day that what happened 2 years later was set by the precedent of how Huddersfield improved in his time in charge. Because, of course, 2 years after he left Huddersfield, they were promoted to the Premier League in an era where a lot of people from that part of the world might say that was one of the most successful periods for Huddersfield, playing in the top division. Wow, what a moment. The academy helped bring through the likes of Billing, Stephen Billing, if anyone remembers that name, but also during his time there when they were starting to make improvements on the pitch with recruitment, there were so many signings that helped get them to where they eventually got to. Conor Cody was brought in for 500,000. We all know him. He obviously went on to play for England. And it was the waves that he made at Huddersfield that then prepared him for his next bigger move up that ladder to Southampton. And we all know that Southampton are a football club that have got such a great reputation, not only for academy, not only for players that have come through, been sold on, but just for being structurally a very, very good football club. And of course, the predecessor at Newcastle, a certain Mitchell, he was at Southampton once upon a time, just 3 or 4 years prior to Mr. Wilson coming in. So it was his time at Southampton where things got even more interesting with a couple of big names along the way. Now, during Wilson's time at Southampton, there were a host of names, and we'll talk about individual transfers in a second, but I'll give you a little spoiler, Virgil van Dijk, that came into the football club that he can proudly say were his, but there were also so many outgoings, players in the final years of their contract that he got money for. Again, we'll cover that later in this video. But in his time at Southampton, they generated £237 million in transfer revenue. This helped keep Southampton afloat. This helped propel Southampton to the top league in England, but also with an ability to sign players to suit the manager, who at the time, for large spells, was Hasenhüttl. At one point in a 2-0 win against Norwich, just to hammer home how influential Wilson was during his time at Southampton in terms of transfers, 8 of the 11 players on the pitch that day, yeah, you guessed it, were signed by him. And again, the transfer record that he had in England for that particular time in his career is a one that we'll definitely touch on, because it's a one that he should be proud of, but interestingly, he's not. But again, he'd had offers to go back to Scotland, his native Scotland, and he turned them down earlier in his career. And the next move came, obviously, to go to Glasgow Rangers. Wilson arrived at Rangers at a time where Celtic were dominating year after year after year. Steven Gerrard had been in the job for a short spell. He was improving things, but Celtic had just won the league again. One of the proudest achievements probably of Wilson's career is how he completely turned that around. He signed players like Hadjis, players like Roof, players to play with Morello up front and form a really solid attack. And they absolutely blew it out the water. Obviously, Steven Gerrard had a massive say in that, but they won the league the following season by 25 points, which for Rangers at the time, after all of the trouble they'd had across the previous decade, the liquidation, you name it, was a massive, massive achievement. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say his time at Rangers was all sunshine and rainbows. It wasn't. After winning that league, after having success in Europe, all of their fans, after sales of players as well, expected them to push on in transfer windows. The last 2 of his tenure, there wasn't really much in that department. But Wilson went out of his way to improve their academy. A Rangers B side was produced, but also the infrastructure of the football club was something he wanted to work on, and something that I think a lot of people at Rangers, despite looking back, and I know the fans, any that might jump in the comments might say they didn't like him by the end, there were protests. It's because their fans never saw the progress that their hard work in winning the league, in pushing on, in positivity in European competition, the revenue that comes with that, did not match it. And look, a sporting director is only based off the signings he makes, the players he sells for fans. Fans don't care as much about the infrastructure side of things. It can't all be sunshine and rainbows, and I think Rangers fans might look back on Ross Wilson's time, it not taking advantage of what was one of their most recent successful periods in their history in the SPL. But then, of course, it was a good time for him to leave, and that brought his last role before he came to Newcastle United, and that was at Nottingham Forest. Again, working with Mr. Marinakis, not the easiest of guys to work with. He's done wonders in such a short space of time there, and I think a lot of the Nottingham Forest fans, from what I've seen online, are very disappointed to see this man go. He's overseen so many transfers, and he's found a knack of signing players that can perform in the short term quickly to get the results on the pitch, but have also got that sell-on value. And I don't need to tell you one, a certain Anthony Elanga, who we just parted with £55 million for, picked up for £13 million from Manchester United. You've got Elliot Anderson, yes, £35 million, a little bit more, but look at the wonders he's doing, taking advantage of that PSR situation with Newcastle. Callum Hudson-Odoi, Milenkovic, all players brought in. Matt Sells, a former Newcastle goalkeeper who's gone on to absolutely smash it between the sticks for them. He has been instrumental in the recruitment that has helped Nottingham Forest get into those European places with the help of Nuno. Of course, things have gone to absolute crap for Nottingham Forest in the time since, with managerial changes, you name it. Maybe not the best transfer window last time out, but again, he has helped Forest return to European football for the first time in, 25, 30 years? It's a great CV, but now let's talk about what needs to happen in Newcastle and what we can expect to happen. Well, let's get a few out of the way that maybe fans watching this aren't as bothered about, because it doesn't directly affect things on the pitch in the short term as much, and it's got to be a training ground and academy. Look, we are led to believe there's going to be improvements to Benton. We even led to believe that Newcastle are looking at sites further afield to get a brand new training ground infrastructure, and that needs to happen. But also what I want to see Wilson, like he's done in previous roles, is give a lick of paint and a little bit of TLC to our academy. Look, I'm not going to deny since the takeover, Newcastle's academy has improved somewhat. We've seen players plucked from all around Europe, some of the players that we are told are some of the most sought after. But with a lot of these players, it's still not working out. Do we need to look a little bit closer at our loan strategy? Yes. Do we need to look a little bit closer at bringing Eddie Howe and the first team closer to that academy player, that academy side, and integrating between the two? At Rangers, he totally overhauled how things were looking behind the scenes with regards to their academy. And a team like Rangers, where the money is not there like it is for a team like Newcastle, that's needed more than ever if they're going to compete with Celtic at the top and continuously get into European football. He introduced the Rangers B team, and upon coming into Rangers, he had this to say about changes he wanted to make at the time.
But if there is an opportunity that can make us better in the short term, then we'll look at it.
You're also in charge of the scouting structure here, and you mentioned in your media before developing an excellent scouting structure. So what does that look like, and how does it change from what's already in place? Yeah, so we have to grow, basically. There's been a lot of good work done. Andy's leading a really good team of people there. There's no doubt about that. But we want to grow in all areas. So we want to have more scouts on the ground. We want to have a greater presence in Europe than we've got at this moment in time. We want to have more working on our video work, we want to have more working on our data work, and we want to bring all that together with a really clear vision and strategy as to 1, where we're looking, 2, how we're looking, and 3, what we're looking for. And then finally, how we interact with people, how we represent Rangers. The scouting and recruitment team are often the first touch point that many people across the world will have with Rangers, and I want to make sure that every interaction that anybody has with this club represents the standard that we want in this club. So
let's see where that one goes. Hopefully that can be a change in the short term, and mainly a change in the short term for the long term. And next up, it's got to be contracts. I'm seeing people plastering it all over social media. A certain Sandro Tonali, thanks to the media. Yeah, Paul Scholes, if you're watching this, and I'm sure you're not, thank you very much. People are talking about him. People are talking about him, and if you think about what the disaster that was the 2025 summer transfer window with Alexander Isak, we cannot allow that to happen again. It sounds like a stuck record. I'm seeing it all over Twitter, but it's factual. And you look at our squad, Sandro Tonali needs tying down if he can, even purely just because we want to get that large fee for him. Sven Botman, another fantastic footballer who will hopefully stay fit, needs a new contract. Tino Livramento needs to sign a bumper one. He's young and he's one of the best fullbacks in Europe. Bruno, there's now rumours that he's going to be tied down. He's our captain. He's instrumental to all we do. I've got no doubt Wilson, organising contracts is probably the easier part. God, I say that in inverted commas, of what he has to do, because compared to signing and recruiting new players, tying down current ones is maybe that easier bit, because the club and the player already have that relationship, and that's got to be up there on a list. And of course, finally, the biggest one, the one that fans are most bothered about, it's transfers. Look, I think about Ross Wilson, and I would probably argue that he is the lesser of the people to take this hot seat in terms of reputation. Dan Ashworth, his CV coming from England and Brighton spoke for itself. Paul Mitchell, glamorous, he went abroad, he'd worked abroad, he'd worked in England, he'd worked in the Premier League, but what they all have in common is a great CV of signing, finding players. And I'd argue Wilson probably has one up on his transfer fees out as well, and how he's negotiated players leaving the football club. Where to start with this one? Well, it's got to be Virgil van Dijk. That is a player that Ross Wilson can proudly say he discovered at Southampton. He brought him in, £70 million plus fee out to Liverpool, and the rest, as they say, is history. Premier League title lifts, Champions League lifts, and people say he's one of the best defenders to ever grace the Premier League. That one's up for debate. You've got, even in his time in Forest, you've got the likes of Elliot Anderson taking advantage of that PSR, as I previously mentioned. Callum Hudson-Odoi, Elanga suiting Nuno's system, getting them in for cheap, but with that high sell-on value, as we've seen with Elanga. What I find really, really impressive about Ross Wilson has been his ability, particularly at Southampton, to sell players for good fees in the last year of their contract and navigate that. Nathaniel Klein going out, Pele going out abroad. These were all players that were crucial to the Southampton side, but wanted out, but fees were commanded for it. And that £237 million up in revenue during his time at Southampton is full testament to that. He did give the manager what they needed at the time by bringing players in that were good for now, but also with that sell-on value. And I look at Ross Wilson coming into this football club. It's good that we can see he's got an eye for players, which is needed. But also, I'd say this is certainly his biggest job of his career so far. And he does have that ability to work around certain restraints and certain restrictions. Well, that's going to be no different here because Newcastle are continuing to navigate and operate in a transfer world with the dreaded three letters PSR. And we've done so well to sell the likes of Anderson and Minter and have a great summer just gone in terms of money spent. But it's going to creep its head again. And we are not going to get to where we want to be as fast as we'd like. But Ross Wilson coming into this role has such an important job on transfers out, but also players in. Because Newcastle have achieved so much, more than I ever expected in the 4 years since the takeover. Because not only Eddie Howe has been a gem, an absolute gem of a signing as a manager, but also because we've been able to bring in players like Botman, like Bruno, like Tonali, that have, like Alexander Isak, although there was some big fees in there, these players have hit the ground running straight away and propelled us to Champions League football and the Carabao Cup in the cabinet. Ross Wilson is going to come in. He's got those restraints to manage, but he's also got a job to support his management and keep bringing in talent from all across Europe and wider that supports where this Newcastle team needs to be, and that is getting better and better year upon year upon year. But what do I think sets Ross Wilson aside and makes him a little bit different to the two previous people to take up this role since the takeover? And what does he have to make sure he does right? Well, it goes without saying, and I do believe the reports I see, what Ross Wilson needs to prepare himself for, and I know he'll know this because they should, learning from previous mistakes have been talked about in his interview, he needs to learn how to work with Sir Eddie Howe. He has put himself in a position as our manager to have full trust of the board, to have full trust in everything that goes on at this football club. You need to build around a manager that has achieved so much for us in such a short space of time. He's built wonderful players that were maybe once upon a time average players. He's helped us, he's managed us through Champions League campaigns, Carabao Cup campaigns, you name it. And Ross Wilson, unlike previous, look, we all know what happened with Mitchell. It was widely reported and we found out in the aftermath. Eddie Howe found out about him being sacked from a phone call from a beach lounger. That should never happen, but it told you something about the relationship. Eddie Howe spoke publicly about how he was pushed away from transfers, which was very weird from him, from Mitchell coming in. He had less control, less part of the conversation. I don't think that's going to happen in future. That relationship needs to be close-knit. Ross Wilson needs to listen to the needs of his manager. He needs to trust him. But in turn, Eddie Howe needs to trust that Ross Wilson will take what he says on board, and them two need to work in tandem. Eddie Howe is a very, very obsessive manager, and it's what makes him great. And Mitchell's ego and his ability to try and come in a football club and make it about him was he was the making of his own downfall. One for a better word. And that leads me on to my last point. What do I think from all of my research, and my God, there's been a lot, do I like about Ross Wilson from studying him that I think is different to the previous two? Well, from watching YouTube video after YouTube video, reading article after article after article, I almost found myself getting captivated in Ross Wilson's hard work, in how he's built his career up from putting in all the hours at Falkirk many, many moons ago to getting that first big opportunity, to trying to climb up the ladder, to turning down certain opportunities because he still had something left to do in his time at Southampton. He's grafted his bollocks off with nothing handed to him to get where he is. And that is signified in how he talks about his achievements. He was asked recently in an interview when he was at Forest what his proudest achievement was, and he could have said anything. Signing Virgil van Dijk, the transformation of Rangers Academy and everything he did there, winning the league with Rangers with a 25-point lead and everything that he contributed to that. No. He said one of the best moments of his career was simply a European match between Southampton and Inter Milan.
They're all kind of symbolic moments. So I remember thinking about Southampton. We played into Milan in European competition at St Mary's in a game that a lot of people say was the best ever night at St Mary's. And I remember at the time thinking that. I remember thinking, wow, we've taken Southampton into Europe.
He could have really talked up the signing of Virgil van Dijk that led him on to go to Liverpool to do everything he's done there. And even when talked about, are you proud to have achieved that? How much is that on your CV at top of the list? This is what he said.
With the moves of Fraser Forster, Victor Wanyama, Virgil van Dijk, and more recently Stuart Armstrong south of the border, is there a lot of, do you feel a lot of pressure on you when you identify these talents and for them to come down and do well? Does that affect you?
So what I would say there is the scouting and recruitment, I'm never a fan of people who claim that they've signed Virgil van Dijk, for example. I think what we've built here at Southampton is a huge team effort, and what I lead here is a brilliant team. Many of the people that's part of our team in Scout have been here almost 10 years. They all know their jobs inside out. We've got wonderful people work for us. So first and foremost, it's a team effort.
I just love that. I just love that it's a team effort. It's constantly a team effort. And that is what Eddie Howe, Mad Dog Tyndall and everyone else that has built this incredible project since we were taken over needs. Someone who wants to play as a team. And Eddie Howe will not have it any other way. And just on Ashworth and Mitchell, that ego that we talk about that was probably his party, especially in Mitchell's case, their downfall. Well, this is what Wilson thinks about egos and exactly where he puts that on the scale in it to be successful in his job.
And one of the things that I've been really clear on in my career is whatever is best for the club, whatever's best for the coach and whatever's best for the team always comes before me. And sometimes you have to put yourself second or maybe even third or fourth. So you may front something up that's nothing to do with you. You may front something up that was somebody else's decision and not yours. But for the betterment of the club, that's what you got to do. And it could probably take you a little bit of time in your career to get that straight and get that clear in your head. But once you do, you got to remember that for the greater good, you've always got to put yourself second, third or fourth. And the club has always got to go first. And we're employed by the clubs to do the best we can for the club. We're employed to work with our coaches, appoint our coaches, make the players do the best they can and build the best infrastructure we possibly can. But that means you've got to park your ego to one side.
I love that. No egos. And there isn't any room for that because that's, as I mentioned, that's been the downfall of the likes of Mitchell. But look, I'm going to wrap that there on Ross Wilson and what I think he can bring to the table. On paper, yes, just like we've said from the previous two, there's so many boxes ticked there, and this man seems such a hard-working guy with the right personality, I believe, to fit in and mould the team to see success in this position. Newcastle fans have been left picking up the pieces from previous years where roles have failed, Ashworth's gone out, you name it, Mitchell, we're all wondering why. Why is this not working behind the scenes? Why does it seem a bit chaotic? We talk about becoming one of the clubs at the top, but we don't have the foundations and the structure there to be a club at the top. Well, Hopkinson's come in, Wilson's come in. There's two massive boxes ticked for Newcastle. Let's see whether we get the stability, the decisions, the transfers, the contracts and the infrastructure that these people brag that is their domain and that is what they're good at and get Newcastle United further and further on that map. Success on the pitch and success off. Newcastle fans, if you've liked this video, and my God, did this take a lot of digging. I did go hunting any Newcastle content creators talking about Ross Wilson so I could learn more about him, and I couldn't find anything apart from the fact of who he signed at Forest and who he was responsible for at Southampton. I wanted to know more about the guy. So if you've enjoyed this, whack us that like, it goes a long way. Whack that subscribe button and let me know your thoughts. Is this someone you're excited about? Is this someone you're worried about after previous failings in this position? Or are you just more bothered about what's going on the pitch and what Eddie Howe and the lads are doing when it comes to Brighton on Saturday? I want to know. I want to know your thoughts. Thank you very much for watching. And fingers crossed, this is one of those final pieces in the background team puzzle to really send Newcastle to the next level. Here's to hoping. Keep the faith, Newcastle fans, as always. How are you, lads?